everyone. Hi. Are you having a good time so far? Great. I hope I can keep that going. So it's great to be in Belgrade. This is my first time here. My name is Sunni Pavlovic. I am studio manager at that game company. Today I want to talk about what it means to prioritize the emotional experience in game design and the role that art and technology plays in that. I know when we think of games we don't often talk about emotions, so this may be a new kind of topic, but I hope that it can be also very interesting and kind of open your minds to thinking about the power of video games and what they can be. So, before I really start, to know kind of who I'm talking to, if you can just raise your hand, if people who play video games, can you raise your hand? And thank you. And how about, if you're not too scared, can you raise your hand if you never played video games? Okay, and maybe there's some people in between. Okay, so historically speaking, when we're thinking about the mainstream video game industry, there's a few kind of key images that come to mind, and they tend to be games that look like this. They're very exciting, fast-paced, it's real, you feel powerful, you're blowing things up, and you feel all powerful. When we're talking about video games, very rarely do you hear people discussing topics such as human connections and growth in positive ways or transformation, or how people can connect on some kind of human level through their experience in the game. Instead, games tend to focus and really push ideas of like, oh, it should be really challenging and exciting and fun, and you sort of feel addicted. And I want to keep playing, and sometimes I feel, really, I get all this stress, but it's like this pleasurable stress, or it's just full of violence. But I think that games can be more than that. But if we're looking at what is the traditional kind of characters that we see and play in games, they tend to be of a very limited scope. These kind of characters, we look at examples on the screen, they skew towards characters with strength, who can move fast, who have power, who have weapons. They're able to destroy things and sometimes destroy each other. Because there's such a limited range of characters, the stories and experiences that we have within the game are themselves become limited. And the emotional set that we experience in games is limited as well. I want to show you this chart as a way of explaining the emotional content that we see in video games today. So the different colors actually correspond to the film industry. So this is kind of what the makeup of all the different films in the film industry are. So we have action, adventure, horror, comedy, drama, and the ways that they're split in films. Now, I want to use this as a backdrop to then look at how video games and see how it compares. With video games, the picture becomes much less balanced because we have strategy games all here on the left. We have puzzle games that are simple and easy and, just kind of fun, but there isn't a lot of depth to the puzzle games. And the strategy games tend to be very logical and rational. There isn't a lot of feeling in them. But then we do have games that become more exciting and more challenging, more quick-paced. And it is starting to tap into some kind of primal emotions we have. And then, of course, there's the horror genre. So there's really a split of, if you look at the modern video game industry right now, this is what it looks like. So we have primal, aggressive, destructive and horrifying emotions. But when we look at the right side, we go, okay, well, where are all those games? The games that exist, the kind of experiences that exist in film, but that don't exist in games hardly at all. And this is actually not by accident or chance, but this is by design. But it doesn't have to be, because as game designers, we can choose what kind of game experiences we want to create. So that's kind of more of what I want to talk about, of being a game designer and the kind of experiences that you can create for your audiences and how you can reach people and affect them in positive ways. And that is mainly done, I believe, through emotions, and that can transform people. So my goal, and the goal of my studio, is to change the public's impression of video games by expanding the emotional spectrum of what video games can be and what they can communicate. I want for us to be able to understand what does it mean to design game experiences that resonate with players on a human level. How is this done, and why does this even matter? What are the benefits that we as society and the players receive by making these different kind of games and with new emotions? Now, before I talk specifically about video games, I'm going to look more broadly first at art and design and the humanities and their counterparts, science and technology through history, and sort of how they come together, and you kind of need one and the other. Because if you think about video games, it's really a blend between the arts and the sciences, I will shortly explain, most art is. It's not something we think about, so I'm going to provide a few examples. When I think of what are arts and humanities and what is their role in society, I believe that they are our attempts as humans to understand ourselves, to express emotions and ideas, to challenge, and sometimes even answer those ideas about who we are. Similarly, science is the pursuit of truth, and in that pursuit, sharing that knowledge with the greater community. So science and technology provide the innovations and the inventions that give us more sophisticated tools for expressing ourselves. So that's how art and science actually work together very closely. So even though we don't often think of it, science and technology play an important part of human expression when they're evenly balanced in relationship to art. Now, imagine we're going to go on some time travel. So we're going to take a short journey back in time to look at some examples of how the earliest forms of expression were made possible by technology, and how, no matter how primitive that technology appears by today's standards, it's still made that kind of art possible. So fire, I think, is one of the most basic and earliest forms of technology, even though today we hardly think of fire as technology because we're so used to it. But that doesn't change the fact that at the time, this was a new way that empowered people's lives and opened up many more possibilities. Now, when early humans learned how to use fire, they suddenly had a large access to charcoal that they never had before. And what did they do with that charcoal? They put it to good use, expressing their daily lives, the things they cared about, the things that they couldn't understand or they felt were important, and they created these paintings on the walls that we still have today. And art and expression and visual media has so many centuries have developed. So looking at this, it seems very simple, but in a way, it also is very sophisticated if you think at the time. Just the notion of representing something that you would see, that would exist on a wall. And I think without that charcoal, it's much harder to find the materials to start sketching those things that we can still find. Another example, a little bit later, is even the epic stories that were recorded just by chiseling stone. You know, without even those simple tools to chip into stone, we wouldn't have, humanity wouldn't have been able to share those epic stories that were then passed on and that we can still find today. If we look at, if we move further, later in time, more recently, when you think of visual fine artists, people who paint, they obviously have very strong artistic skills. But I would say very early on, they also had to be chemists because they were the ones making their own paint, because unlike today, they couldn't just go down to the store and make it. So if they wanted to be a painter, they had to both have that drive and talent, but also be willing to create the very base materials that they made to paint with. Similarly, when we think about photography in the early days, the photographers were not just the ones taking the photos, they were also the ones who were making their own lenses and developing new forms of film technology so that they could share their images, because they couldn't go down to the store and print anymore. So I like to think of these examples of, sometimes people try to divide the arts and the sciences, but my studio, we see that the best art is made with the best science, when they're evenly matched together. And I think that's actually a very powerful idea that people don't think about very often. So I'm summarizing these examples as a way to demonstrate that close relationship between art and technology. To think of it another way, art without technology can be limited just by virtue of being too simple. You just don't have that many different options available to express the ideas you have as emotions of what you want to say about who we are and all those burning ideas you have that you want to get out. On the other side, when you have technology without art, it's very limited as well. It can just do things, but it has no direction. It has no way for it to then express something. It's just a tool. And a tool that isn't used by an artist is not effective. So technology without heart, or I would say depth, doesn't get us very much. So the key again is balance. Both have their place, art and technology, but neither is as strong without the other. And so when you get them together, you create something that seems magical, that wouldn't exist otherwise. Before I talk about video games yet, I still want to provide some more broad examples to kind of illuminate this idea of the role of art and technology and the power that it has. So I think something that most people are very familiar with is film, and specifically animated film. This is a very popular type of film content that people watch. Now when you think of this, it's actually digitally rendered 3D animation. When it's well done, audiences experience a sophisticated blend of technical prowess through the computer graphics and the long history of storytelling and animation. One without the other, and you wouldn't get films such as this, or your own favorite animated films. So one of my favorite examples is Pixar film WALL-E. Now, the creators failed to understand how to reach people on the human level when they were creating this story about robots who were cleaning up Earth and then trying to save humans who were living far off in space. If they couldn't reach the audience on the human level and tap into human emotions, what would WALL-E be? WALL-E would be a movie about robots cleaning up trash. And no one would watch that movie and no one would care because it doesn't relate to them on their lives in a way that is meaningful and that they care about. It could be visually impressive. It could have the latest technology. The robots could even be funny and comical, but you could never relate to them. And then, as a result, the problem would be it would never invite us to question how are we living our lives and what's most important about the time we have that we're living. It would just be cute, funny robots. Instead, what we have with WALL-E is it's still a story about robots and a little bit about humans. But I am in awe of the fact that the creators were able to tell a compelling love story about two non-human beings with a limited ability to communicate. So for those of you who haven't seen the film, the robots are actually more human than the humans. And, but they can hardly talk. And what's so special about that is the creators knew how to give the robots human qualities enough that we don't stop at just seeing them as robots, as little objects that can carry out tasks, but we start to feel the emotions, and we start to feel, you know, maybe I'm kind of like that too, or people that I know are like that, and maybe I should sort of think like, what is this story about, and what does it mean to me? So even when I leave the theater, I don't just forget it, but I go, wow, you know, that was a story about something, and I'm thinking about it, and I think maybe in the process of watching that 2-hour film, something clicked in my own mind, and it's changed me, hopefully for the better. And I think that is the essence of understanding how people can be reached on a human level by tapping into emotions, even through this art form that they just sit and passively watch. If we continue to think about animation and the kind of films that Pixar makes, the implications for the animated film industry are very positive. So rather than being just this niche kind of genre film that only a few people watch, we actually see that Pixar films appeal to audiences across all segments. So that means young, old, men, women, wealthy, not wealthy. They're all loved and shared by all these different types of people. So really, these kind of animated films are films for everyone, rather than a specific audience. And they often break the box office records along the way, and this is what this chart demonstrates. And you see the line that's kind of slowly going up. That's the average return of the film box office during this period of time. And then we see that all the orange dots stand for the Pixar films each year and how they're significantly above the average. So this is what I call the Toy Story effect. You make this kind of movie and everyone comes out and watches these films. There's something special and human and relatable that people really seem to enjoy and seek out. And so, in summary, this is a very healthy and positive business in terms of making profit, but also, as an art form, it becomes meaningful because you're creating stories that people will actually care about and talk about and tell their friends. Now, if we analyze the film box office revenue from 1995 to 2012, and I realize I'm talking a lot about film and not video games yet, but I'm trying to set these up as an example because I think people understand film very well, because everyone does watch film and they have an idea of what films are, but maybe not everyone plays video games. But I think that by comparing the two and setting up this background, it becomes a lot more easy to understand when I do talk about video games, what are the implications. So if we look at these film genres over this period of time, the ones that bring in the most money, and that's what I would call the kind of films that are the most popular, we see action, adventure, comedy, and drama are the clear winners. If we go back to that previous chart that I'd shown earlier, we see this is the same bar graph data put in a pie chart form. And so again, we see video games are taking up that whole half, that left half, and totally ignoring everything on the right. When we see, look how huge that chunk of comedy and drama is. And this is what people have shown as humans, they just want in film. They want in their entertainment. These are the kind of stories and emotions that appeal to humans that we're not seeing in video games. So when I look at data like this, I go, why is it so different? Why do we have video games that are just all on the left and nothing on the right? My answer is, I think video games have a baggage from coming out of the software industry. And very early on, as being something similar to software, the main focus was, let's create technical wonder. And there wasn't really any question of let's create an emotional narrative that appeals to people. So the kind of people who were making video games and playing video games was all skewing towards this narrow group. And then there were the same people, and they would make the games, and they would play the games, and they would create this feedback loop of the same people making and playing. And then that became very difficult to break out of. And there was less desire for experimentation or just trying new things. And then because of that feedback loop that's so limited, it affects the kind of experiences that are being created for players. So this is, now that we are talking about video games more specifically, I bring up this again. Art without technology can be limited by virtue of being overly simple. Technology without art can also be equally limited for lacking depth and heart. Both have their place, but neither is as strong without the other. So if video games in the beginning, and even now, have all this baggage of coming out of the software industry, imagine what happens when we throw off that baggage and you get rid of all the old conventions and you start over from new, and you're like, okay, I'm not going to think about what was made before, or I'm not going to think about what's selling the best in video games, but I'm a video game designer, what do I want to make? And then we start asking new questions. If we're not thinking about, well, let me do what we made last year, but better, I'm thinking, again, the idea of art and entertainment is for everyone, instead of just the same audience. I'm going to start making different games because my audience has changed. And I'm not thinking, well, video games are software. I'm like, no, video games are entertainment. They should be entertaining. They should be like the great stories you hear about, your favorite novels, music, books, poetry, film. Except this is interactive. And then we start to see these new kind of experiences being created. In the beginning, I mentioned that I am with that game company. And this is that game company. We are a studio of 14 developers, and we are based in the heart of the entertainment industry in Los Angeles, California, and USA. And I think that does affect the kind of experiences we make, being so close to the entertainment industry. Our goal is to design experiences that leave players with a positive transformation. I think that's a rare statement to hear in the video game industry. We have been fortunate enough to be recognized as leaders in the field of designing these broadly accessible, artistically crafted video game experiences. I think it's pretty easy to say my studio is one of the most award-winning studios in the video game industry. As a kind of quick background, our first game, Flow, is now in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And this happened last year. For the first time, the Museum of Modern Art decided to include video games in its collection, and Flow was one of the first ones. Also last year, the Smithsonian Museum in America also acquired 2 video games for the very first time, and one of them was also our game, which was called Flower. Our most recent game, Journey, last year was the first time in the history of the nominations for the Grammy Awards for a video game soundtrack to be selected. It didn't win, but it was nominated in the category of Best Visual Arts, and the other contenders were blockbuster films, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, The Adventures of Tintin, The Artist, The Dark Knight Rises, and Hugo. And so when you start to think about the institutions that are recognizing these kind of game experiences, you realize that we're not making the traditional kind of game experiences, but we're tapping into the same kind of values as the other forms of art that are much older. Instead of thinking of games as software, we're like, well, these are games as art, these are games as entertainment, and they're being recognized as such because there's a lot of artistic value that is being put into them, in terms of the music, in terms of the visual design, and in terms of the core interaction mechanics. So I would say, well, what does make our video games different from others? Why would they be recognized by these major institutions? Why would they win awards? And I'd say, unlike most video game developers, we believe that games are meant to be played by everyone, and that is what we mean by broadly accessible, which means if you've never played a game before, if you've never developed those skills, if you've never been interested, if maybe you're of an older generation and they didn't have video games, and so you just never understood them or had any interest, you can still play our games. It's like being able to read a book or being able to watch a movie. You shouldn't have to require a lot of time and practice to be able to, one, enjoy the games or even understand them or be able to barely play them. That's why you can see that we have games. This is actually our game being played across different venues when it was on exhibition. You can see children playing these games, very young children. In the top right, we actually had a 3-year-old play all the way through our last game, and his parents did a video recording of it and they put it on the internet to show him, because he actually really liked this game. I'm sure he didn't understand all the deeper, mature ideas of the game, but he was able to play and enjoy that experience. So we make games accessible for all ages, and as you can see, men and women. This is a trash can. What does it mean to design experiences that resonate with players on a human level? It means throwing away all that old baggage and all that old thinking and taking a new look at this powerful medium so that we can focus on delivering something new but most importantly, valuable. And this is something that people really want. So think about it. It means stripping away the distractions and the kind of things that are commonly found in video games that aren't very meaningful, the kind of challenges, the timers, the stress, the addictive layers, and try to create something that you can easily get into, that you feel immersed in that world. You can start to really feel the emotions of the characters and the experience and how kind of you relate to that in your own life. Instead of having this false excitement of thrills or challenges, we've shifted the questions from what do players want, what's selling the most, what is the most popular, and we're thinking, you know, what do players, and instead of maybe even using the word players, what do humans need in games? And how can we get more people playing games because we treat them as humans and we're looking at the human needs? So a question we often receive is, how did we end up creating experiences that moved in such different directions from the rest of the industry? And I would say that the answer is, very early on, we got very lucky when we were very young, just students, and when we were starting to make video games from scratch. We weren't being paid to make video games and told what kind of video games to make. Instead, we were challenged to create something new. So the studio was actually kind of traces its history back to 2005 when this group of students were attending the USC School of Cinematic Arts and learning to make games. And the game that kind of changed everything was this game, which is called Cloud. And the challenge they were given was to make a game that was completely different from anything that was being currently made in the industry. So something that was calming, soothing, therapeutic, just kind of pleasant to play. And so the story is about this boy who is sick, and so he's in a hospital. And when he's in the hospital, instead of being like a regular boy being able to run around and play with his friends, he's stuck in bed. And so he dreams of being able to go out in the world and fly, how free that would be. And you know, there's a very kind of positive message associated with that is he gathers the clouds in the sky, he brings them together so that it brings rain to the cities and sort of like helps clean and bring vibrancy back to Earth. And what was amazing was we were just trying to make a game that we thought would be kind of fun to make in school. Like, okay, this is different, let's try it. What ended up happening was we got this totally unexpected response from players from around the world. And they were writing us, and we were just students. And we're like, we just made the student game, and who cares, right? No one's paying attention. But instead, you know, you'd have players from Japan and just different people we've never met, players who'd never played games before. Maybe they're in the 40s or 50s, and this was the first time we played a game because they're like, hey, this sounds really nice. I think I want to play. So they would say, like, you guys are beautiful people. Please continue to make these kind of games because this is what the industry needs. We need to show that games can be different and games can be for all people. And so we were thinking, like, geez, this was unexpected. What does this mean? And there was a revelation to us, like something just clicked where by receiving all this fan response, we saw that there was a real human need and that people want these kind of different emotions in their games, and they want these games to be a form of entertainment that they weren't seeing. And so this kind of sparked a new approach to how we made games and when we eventually formed our studio. So we see emotions kind of as a human need, just like eating and drinking. It's so basic, but we need that kind of satisfaction and that spiritual fulfillment. And people have feelings, and they want to be able to experience those through games. And just like when we have all different kind of emotional needs, like we want to feel excited, or we want to feel calm, or we want to feel happy or sad or mellow, or we want humor. We have so many options in other forms of entertainment. We can take a fast roller coaster ride and feel that thrill, or we can have that meditative calm of reading a good book, or we can watch a movie and laugh and enjoy it with our friends. So we're like, okay, well, you know, emotions in art, specifically visual arts, that's been done. It's been done for centuries. We know how to do that. So if you go to an artist and say, create a picture, a scene, or a mood that feels sad, but not too sad, but just sort of makes you feel something, makes you kind of think. They know how to do that. And the same with musicians. They've had hundreds of years to develop a history and practices of what kind of music makes people feel this melancholy. But if you tell a game designer, okay, make a game that kind of makes you feel a little sad, but not too sad that you stop playing, that was an unknown. So one thing we realized is we have to start taking from what these older media had already established and learned. They knew how to create these stories and emotions and sort of apply it in a new way through the very form of interactive entertainment. So following up on our student game Cloud, we graduated and we were offered a deal by Sony to make games for their new PlayStation, the PlayStation 3, which had just was about to be coming out, but this was in 2006. So we formed that game company and we made 3 games for the PlayStation 3. And the first one was Flow. This was in 2007. Our second game was Flower, and this came out in 2009. Our most recent game is called Journey, and it came out in 2012. And we're currently working on our 4th game. We're no longer limited to just creating games for the Sony platform. So what we learned in our first game, Flow, was that when you want to create games for new audiences that have never played games before, there's a new challenge that most other game developers don't have to deal with, and that's the idea of accessibility. Because either you're on your PC and you know how to play first-person shooters, so you already memorize all the controls that are common, or you're just used to having that controller in your hand. But you know, if you give that to someone who's never played a game before, they're going to be confused. Like, why are there so many buttons? What am I supposed to do? Oh, I'm getting anxiety. I'm not enjoying this. I don't want to play anymore. And so that's a problem. So we learned in Flow, like, okay, we're on this really powerful and well-established format. Actually, what we do is we take away control. And we say, nope, your controller is just a thing. And you just hold it. And you don't have to push buttons. And it's not any time thing. You just hold it, and you tilt it, and you can play the game. And you have one button. You just push one button, any button, and they all do the same thing. And you create this state where you're taking out the pressure, especially for the players. They can't fail, and they don't have to memorize. They don't have to have this memory or history, and they learn to play. It feels safe, and it feels good. So that's what we learned in our first game, Flow. So now, as developers, we've learned to challenge ourselves. And like, okay, we've already kind of figured out how to make games that are accessible, so the controller is easy to use for new players. But how do you make it accessible and introduce new emotions? Because the game Flow, it's just very soothing game. There isn't so much complexity, and it doesn't have emotions. So when we made Flower, we wanted to express something new, and that emotion we wanted to express in the video game format was actually love. Like, how do you express the idea of love? Like, how do you make people feel that? And I think what's different about video games is love is not something as simple as, oh, I'm showing 2 people holding hands, or they said certain words, so don't you feel that love? And you know, as in real life, it doesn't work that way. It has to feel real. It has to come through, and you have to feel it as a player. So that was what the task we had with Flower was create something accessible, but also create something with emotion. So actually, this is a photo of a player. This is a boy who has Down syndrome, and so he doesn't have the greatest control. And so he's never been able to play a full video game before. And his brother sent us this because he wanted to show us, like, you guys made something really great. My brother can play this. This is the first time he was able to play games. So you can see he's controlling the flower petals on the screen. And he's actually having a good time. He's playing the game. This is how the game is played. Just by kind of moving the controller around, he's able to activate So we learned something about Flower was when you're trying to create a new kind of game, most games are about fun and challenge. And then so it creates this excitement and this response where you want to go like, yeah, I beat it, or like, oh, I'm so close. But if you're making a game about love, you don't usually want to break that experience by having people shout and get really excited. So we realized, okay, we have to kind of tune this, and we can't approach it with the same kind of idea of, even if this game is fun and challenging and people like it, that's not what we want to make. That's just like all the other games that are already out there. We're trying to make a game about a new emotional feeling. So I'm going to just show a video of what sort of Flower looks and feels like. So this is some of the music also. Music is a very important part of our game experiences. This is just completing the first level in Flower. And so instead of being about destruction, you're about creation. You're bringing like this life and beauty back into your world. So I think this actually can create a new kind of feeling and experience, and it feels very powerful and strong. It does affect people's psychology when you're seeing about the changes you're creating in this world. Because it starts off in a very dreary city, and then all of a sudden you bring the beauty and lushness of nature back to life. So, and then in our third game, the one we made right after Flower, we made Journey. So we've already figured out how to make a game accessible. We've already figured out how to tap into real new emotions in the video game industry. With Journey, we had a new challenge, and that was we want to make something social and play on the social emotions. And by that, we mean Flower was a single-player game, but Journey is a multiplayer game. Now, if you think of multiplayer games, they're often MMOs, and you're kind of like going on conquests and coming together in groups, and you're trying to feed a common enemy. And although it feels social, of like, well, we are helping each other, I am playing with other people, I think the emotion of what we consider social is not there. It's still about a sense of competition. It's still about, I want to be better than the other team, I want to be the best player. It's not about, hey, what is it about living in the same world together, living next to each other, helping each other? What is it about that socialness, about that society that is meaningful? So that's what we tried to do with our game Journey. This is just a kind of a trailer of the game that we put together to kind of give an example of what we were trying to create for players. We play a lone figure who's crossing a desert, just to kind of give you some context. And your only goal is to get to that mountain because there's nothing else you see to do. So that's your ultimate goal. And you're all alone, and there's no light. So it's very lonely, it can be kind of scary. But then you realize, hey, there's somebody else there. And you start to play with each other. And this is actually a real person playing over the internet. Except you don't know who they are, because they have no name. There's no way to communicate with them, there's no chat, there's no player ID. And so you have this idea of, I'm sitting in my living room playing, there's someone else sitting in their living room, maybe they're across the world, maybe they're in Japan, and we don't want to talk to each other, but we are going through an experience together. And I think it develops that idea that that's a real person. Maybe people in this world are really valuable. Maybe you should treat people better or care about people because, this person is playing with me and they have nothing to gain. But there's a closeness, there's a bond that kind of happens as we go through a new world that can be a little scary. And sometimes life is scary. kind of, now that I've introduced the game journey, I'm going to kind of describe the lessons we learned and how to create those social emotions, as well as the challenges we faced. So we wanted to create the idea of like, hey, I'm alone in this world, but wow, I see someone else. I feel this great sense of joy. It's like, hey, there's someone there. This is the online emotion we wanted to create. And this is the emotion that most online games actually create. And that's the excitement. So we're like, okay, we need to do this differently. So this would be your typical action adventure game. You know, there's 5 people in a team, you've got a mission, you've got all these challenges, it's like, okay, we've got to defeat the other side. But really what we're seeing is a lot of noise and a lot of distraction. So that the most exciting things that you care about and you're attracted to are not the other people in the game. It's like, all right, I've got a weapon, you know, there's enemies, let's go beat them. So we had to start, as I said earlier, stripping away, going back to the basics. Let's get rid of the enemies. Okay, we're creating a world. Okay, now there's there's 5 players. Some of them have weapons. You know, guess what happens when you have a gun? You want to shoot it. You take away the gun, and then the game is not about violence anymore. So now it's a game. Okay, it's about 5 people. Well, now let's change the environment so it's not so easy, but it's kind of hazardous. And let's take away some of those people. Now you just have 2 people in a semi-threatening environment that's very bleak and unsure. Now let's put that person farther away so you discover them. So that when you actually come together, it becomes a lot more special. And so this is the idea of designing with great intention and experience, where players start to recognize and appreciate the other person instead of just wanting to like run and shoot and fight and win. So the target we had for this game was, we're building a world and we're building an experience and we're building emotions based on awe, the unknown, and mystery. So it's about discovering these things and feeling small and feeling a desire to get through this world and grow and kind of figure out, what am I doing here? What is this about? And you know, when I describe it, it just seems like a very simple game, and in a way it is. But I think we have to take out so many things and really focus on what is this game about and what's it going to take, so that we're not distracted by those other things. So it seems simple, but I think actually getting that right is quite challenging. So when we see the response from players from this game specifically, of why they care about this game, we hear things like, you know, it's the same game. The only thing that changes each time you play is maybe the person you play with. But everything else doesn't change. But we found that players would keep coming back, playing sometimes hundreds and thousands of times. And this is a two-hour game. And we know that, okay, it's a beautiful game, and, you know, we've had nice music, and it's kind of, you know, cool to be surfing through sand, because, you know, what do you like to do in real life? But you don't have, can you do that thousands of times? And we were seeing that it was about these connections they were making with people on the internet that made it special. And so we ended up getting a lot of fan art. And the fan art that we got, we felt people were trying to synthesize the emotions and the moments that felt the strongest, that resonated with them. So surfing through the sand when it's glowing during sunset, and it's glittering and it's very beautiful, like people remembered that. They remembered the threats and the fear, those emotions of, oh, is my buddy gonna get hurt? Like, I hope he stays safe. And just even at the end when it's cold and you can't see and you're unsure and you lose your way, just the warmth of 2 people staying together and you think that's all you have. So these are actually images from fans who sent us, and they were just trying to tell us, you know, these are the things we loved about your game. To even at the end of the game, this is a screenshot from the game on the right, because the players could not actually communicate with each other in the game. There was no chat. They wanted to express their appreciation, so they would draw in the sand hearts to say, thank you for playing with me. So I want to kind of tie this all together and say, like, okay, you know, I've talked a lot about game design and experiences and entertainment and emotions, and why does this all matter? You know, what are all these stories? And I think there's some things that people think of as kind of icons, of things you kind of grow up with and you can share as a generation, or between parent and children, and you can all enjoy and appreciate. And so it takes me back to the idea of the essence of humanity and what makes stories memorable. And I think it comes down to that our ability as humans to feel emotions, and feel emotions in stories. And as game designers, or in whatever profession you are, in order to create these immersive experiences for audiences that are emotionally engaging, we also have to see beyond the technology, because we have so much technology in our hands now. We're like oversaturated with technology. Instead, we have to think about what is good design. So as designers, I believe it's our duty to consider the audience above all else and what they need in their experience. And when we prioritize using our tools to deliver the optimal audience experience. And that's how we succeed in making something meaningful, memorable, and positive. Thank you.